is going to be a fun one. Also, apparently I forgot to turn on stage amplify. Can everyone hear me? Cool. Alright. Apologies for that. So, it's going to be a fun one. So, a good chunk of this is actually going to be we're going to do a quick overview on some of the stuff we covered the last few weeks, and then we're going to get into what's referred to as objects, and fundamentally they're just a way in order to organize your program. So, so is this going to work? Wait, what? Would not be a computer science course without some technical issues. Alright. So, alright. So I guess let's get started here. So, what is a variable? Going back to our first week, a variable it's an abstract in order to store a value, right? So over here is an example. We have a equals 1, b equals 2, and assigning the value of c to equal the value of a, c equals a, in which case c would equal 1 at the end of this. Functions, which we covered second week, there are a set of instructions that can be repeatedly used, right? So print, for example, is a very commonly used function. So, in this case, 1 plus 1, this will produce the result of 2. Alright. Loops. And this will run forever. Now that I'm looking at the code on here, I should have put a break in here in this example. But loops provide the capability to run a set of operations over and over again, whether it be a finite number of times or forever. Okay. So this was the one that we went through last week, which are conditions or conditionals, right? So if a condition, then perform this action, otherwise do a different action, right? So if else. So if true, then do this. If false, then do what's in the else block. All right. So this next area ties everything together. So I should probably ask, are there any questions about any previous material or whatnot we've gone through the last few weeks? Any open questions or issues or anything anyone's struggling with?
I have one question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I joined pretty late. Do you think it might be too late to be learning here?
I think you're probably good if you want to. Like in my opinion, anyone who picked up this would be so. If you were just jumping in, then basically this would be the last week where I would say you could still be able to catch up with things.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. That said, if you do have any questions on any of this, by all means, feel free to stop me or grab me after the class and can help catch you up a little bit. So, next topic is, or I guess the topic for this week is objects, which are both one of my favorite things to discuss and one of my least favorite things to discuss. So, for a little bit of background, so just to give a little bit of an abstract. So, because objects are used as a way in order to contain and organize your program, they are also going to be extremely nuanced in how they're used. You'll find as many use cases for You'll find as many opinions on how you should use them as you will realistically examples, right? Everyone's going to have a slightly different opinion. So, not going to get into the opinion on exactly all these concepts and everything, or even if these are a good design in general, but just so everyone's aware, objects in computer science are very nuanced. There are multiple opinions and approaches. This is not the only way to build a program. We're just covering it for the sake of being thorough here. If you are curious about alternative approaches, there is an entire area of programming and whatnot and design, which is referred to as functional programming. We're not going to cover that in this course, but if anyone wants to see an alternative approach on how you do things without using objects and whatnot, then that would be a very good example of this. All right. Okay. Let me, I guess, show an example real quick. So, and I'm probably going to end up using the term class and object somewhat interchangeably during this. Not exactly the same thing, but close enough for the purposes of our conversation here. So, what is an object? An object is a mechanism to store related variables and functions, just in general program information, right? So here we have a class called example, right? So within example, it will have a value of x equals 20 and y equals 10. It will also have a function available to it, which, if I were to call, would perform an add operation, which returns the result of these two. So, and I guess for clarification on this, because I just realized this is not on the slide, in this case, all an object is it is a created copy of this class. So, I guess let's ask a question real quick here. Are there any questions so far on like objects, how they're structured, and everything?
I have one.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
I remember seeing a tier list video about programming languages, and some of them were categorized as object-oriented language. What exactly does that mean?
Object-oriented language is okay. So, object-oriented language in this case means that it's largely designed around the concept of objects and inheritance, right? So you are going to make very heavy use of objects and whatnot in it, right? Like a very good example of a language that is very heavily object-oriented is Java, right? Java is almost infamous for it because of how verbose it can be when you're working with it. I'm not going to speak ill of that language, worked in it before. But yeah, so that's kind of what that concept is and everything. Whereas you have the school of thought that's also like functional programming as well. And functional is not so much we're going to put a whole bunch of objects in here. We're going to say, please execute this function, pass these values through, and we're going to have our parts of our program be a composite of the functions, right? So multiple functions nested together. Everyone has an opinion on object-oriented, on whether or not it's good. I'm going to try really hard not to put too much of my opinion on that in this conversation. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah. So I guess the fun part here. Who wants to take a guess at what the output of this is going to be? So, for a little bit of background on what we're doing here. My example is creating a new instance of this example class, which means it's going to contain all of the variables and functions that are currently defined. So, if I were to call, yes, that is correct. It is an object-oriented language. I admit I deferred to, yep.
Okay, can I add something?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, you were asking if what the output is going to be. My guess is that it's going to be like an object that like I'm thinking about it in like unity terms. Like x obviously means like a certain direction, and so does y. So it means that it's going to be placed in a very specific place in a plane of existence, I guess.
I
Whatever
get where you're
way
coming
that
from. I get where you're coming from, and that is a very logical way to approach that. Um, so in the case of my example, or that variable that's been defined at the top, that is an object instance. But wow, this doesn't even run actually. Now that I'm looking at this, yeah, it's just gonna crash. I apologize.
I'm glad I pointed it out.
Wow, that's why it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, okay, yeah, good to know.
Guys, I am.
Oh, where's the pin on this? Does this work?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the problem here is that there is no like object that the x and y value is being assigned to, or I don't know, thing.
The issue here is on this code, and this is a bug on my side, and I'm going to need to go through and fix this later, before the workshop on Friday. But I have a marker on my avatar, why don't I use that? But the issue here is I didn't do this right. So this is not supposed to be Trans Academy example. This is not supposed to be Trans Academy example. It's supposed to be my example. Which makes sense that I made a mistake on that.
Oh, so basically it's the classic Python error of object, uh, an object being mispronounced because of the syntax, right?
In this case, this is just me being silly and naming it the wrong thing.
Exactly, that's what I meant.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a pretty. Yeah, it's a typo. It's a very bad typo, too, because it kind of invalidates the entire output. So I guess the actual outcome of this is this would crash the program. Showing a better example, I guess, on this. So let's say in that print statement, I had myexample.x, right? Myexample.x would return, in this case, one of the internal variables, right? So it would return 20, because within the example class we have here, 20 is the default value for x. That is not a good example, though, and I'm going to need to fix that later. I'm actually a little frustrated I missed that.
And if you write my example.y, it'll give you 10, right?
Exactly. Yep, nail right on the head. And if I were to call add, yep. And if I were to call add, it would return.
Return with what?
Okay. So if I were to call add, what it's going to do is it's going to call this function, right? So if I were to actually call add within here, it would end up returning 30, right? Because what it's going to do is it's going to add 20 plus 10. Self.x is 20. Self.y is 10. Self in this case being a keyword. My apologies. Right. Self and yeah. So for context, self here is a keyword that's used to define if I'm accessing something internally within my class, right? So if I wanted to access, say, self.x, or if I wanted to access the x value that's defined up here, I would reference self.x. If I wanted to reference the y value, I'd use self.y. If I wanted to reference the add value, I would use self.add. I want to say I go more into detail on the next slide. I do not go more into detail on the next slide. I do, yeah, but it's a little bit further ahead. Okay. So I just realized this is a lot of information to throw at everyone, but does all this make sense? Go for it.
So, I come from HTML and CSS background, and I'm used
Oh,
to
excellent, fellow web
composing
developer.
all. Yeah, I'm used to composing all of my containers and the classes and with like
Hmm.
the while loops that we worked on last week. I get
Yep.
really confused on how to close those. Is it just indentation?
It's just indentation. Yeah. There is a
Okay.
unofficial version of Python that someone did. I think it's called. I think it's called.
Python.
Yes, Python. Yes. Yeah. You saw that video, didn't you? Yeah.
Mayhaps.
Yeah. Was it Primadine? I think did a video on that a while back. Yeah, but apparently there
Yeah.
is. Yeah,
Or
there was
somewhere
a
else
video done.
very recently.
Yeah. There was a video done where there's an unofficial version of Python that actually has like those brackets and everything. Nobody uses it in any serious production capacity, to my knowledge, but you know, you're not the only person with a complaint on, using indentation for specifying it. Because on one hand, I get it kind of enforces the code to be readable. On the other hand, I'm looking for a closing bracket when I'm reading the code, so I get it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Anytime.
By the way,
Oh, go for it.
are we using Notepad++ for the workshop?
You can use whatever tool you would like. So most of the students are using Replit, which is an online like text editor and IDE. I believe a couple are using VS Code and they're working like locally with their code and everything. Especially those who already had like a development environment set up previously. And I have no doubt there's a couple people using Notepad++, and I would not be surprised to find out there's one or two people using Vim. So really, it's whatever tool you feel is appropriate.
All right, I'll go for Notepad++.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. So do we got any questions on this part? All right. So I'm gonna be completely honest, and I kind of get the sentiment. First time I saw like something like this years ago, I thought this is way more complicated. Why in the world would I even care of doing this? And the answer is, technically speaking, there's nothing to stop you from doing it without it if you want. Like there really isn't. For the most part, it's a concept of it's a trade-off on organization and readability and the like. Also, what everyone else in the code base around you is doing, right? If everyone else around you is doing object-oriented programming, where they're using classes like this all over the place, then you are pretty much going to have to do so, right? Or if your library or the tooling around you is using it. The example was copy and pasted. That is not ideal. Okay. So, yeah. So technically speaking, yeah, you can do everything without classes on it. So the equivalent version of this would be in the bottom left corner down here. So in this case, x equals 4, y equals 10. And how many typos are we going to have in this slide today? It would be add without self, return x plus. I'm going to fix these slides after this and send them out. Just put a link on here. But what this was supposed to be is add, return x plus y, subtract without the self keyword, return x plus y. So that is a mistake, and that is a direct mistake as a result of copy and pasting the code out of here. So I guess in short, the reason you would want to use classes on this is just it's organization. It's organization and what everyone else around you is using. Okay. All right. So went through this a little bit on the first slide, but I guess to break down how this works, the first line you have here is referred to as the class definition. So it's going to have the class keyword, and then the name of the class, right? So in this case, it is named example. If I wanted it to be named Trans Academy example, I would put Trans Academy example. Variables are defined very similar to how you would define them normally. They are defining, for example, x equals 20, y equals 10, and the functions themselves are defined in a very similar manner, with the exception of having the self keyword for if you want to access other properties, or by properties I mean variables or functions that are currently inside of your class. This new class instance is handled a little differently from language to language. In the case of Python, it's simply this, simply going through, calling this, and creating a new instance. But yeah. All right. I appear to have copy and pasted the same typo on every slide, so that's going to be fun to fix later. But does anyone have any questions on this so far? All right. Okay, so one of the benefits of using classes is you can make use of a concept called inheritance. So, concept of inheritance is I have a class which will extend another class, right? So, when I extend the class, it's going to inherit previously defined methods, right? So, for example, we have a superclass here called animal, right? And we have a function referred to as headpat. So if I were to call, well, okay, I don't want to give away the answer to that when I ask it home. Meanwhile, on we have a class called cat, which is a child class, as in it is inherited from animal, and it also has a headpat method, right? So the fun thing about this as well, which is worth mentioning here, is if you have, whether they be variables or functions, and they are the same name, they will be overwritten in the child class. So, who would like to take a stab at what will be printed as a result of this? Like, let's say I call the headpat method on animal. What'll be printed?
Can you ask the question again?
Absolutely. So let's say I have an instance of animal, right? And I call the method headpat on the instance of animal, right? What will be printed?
Hmm. Meow?
You're close. If I was calling, say, cat, right, it would do that.
Okay, but if it wasn't, then it would not be calling. I'm guessing no human because it's not calling for cat.
You're correct, yeah. So if I created, exactly. So if I created an instance of animal, and I called headpat, then I would expect it to print no human, right? Meanwhile, if I created an instance of cat, and I called um, headpat on the instance of cat, I would expect it to print meow.
Okay. Alright, thank you.
Anytime, yeah. Do I have anything else beyond this? I do not have anything else beyond this. Okay, so open question on any of this. If anyone wants to go back through slides or go back through a specific section, we can do that. Or if there's a general question about anything on this so far, because this is actually the end of the. Because the next slide is basically discussing what the workshop's going to be. Any questions from the Discord? All right. Let me open up the lesson plan real quick here, because I think I can actually talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing next. I want to make sure that this is all on the same page. Okay, so this week's workshop, going to give a little disclaimer, I guess, on what's going to be worked on for this week's workshop. This week's workshop is going to be combining the concepts learned from the last 4 weeks, specifically on writing a game is what we're going to be doing. So we're going to create a skeleton of a game, a basic little setup with like a little combat system and everything during the workshop. And we're going to be extending that system or extending that project throughout the remainder of the course. For anyone who's wondering what's coming up next.
Are there any blocks that I can look at to learn the previous lesson?
Absolutely. Do we have these recorded, right? There's the Academies tab. Yep, absolutely. We also have all of the previous slides for the last few weeks, as well as any worksheets that were done previously. You're welcome to go through those as well if you want to, and potentially even take a look at how some of the other students have solved some of the problems as well. And yeah, you're also welcome to ask myself or Apple for help on any questions you may have while you're going through things.
All right, thank you.
Anytime. Can these screens show streams? I do not know. You mean for the Trans Academy?
They can. They function as any other like video player. So if you put in a stream link, it would show up if you had the video player enabled.
Yeah.
Because I have an idea. This is kind of like feedback recommendation, potential idea. Is to have a sort of like preamble to workshops where you can actually stream yourself coding something that you've made.
Let me talk with you about that later.
Because I just set up something I was trying to see, and I think that would be very feasible. Because I remember the first time you mentioned that, and you're like, but it would be weird. It'd be weird to look at. I think I got a solution. Yeah.
I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear what you found. Yeah. All right. Well, I do not want to take anyone's time. So, I guess quick round. If there are any questions or any questions on this or any of the previous courses or previous materials, anyone who wants something gone through second time, just for a quick little sanity check, or all right. Well, I will be. I guess I'll be seeing everyone on Friday, and I'll be answering questions on Apple's lecture on Wednesday. So, see y'all around. Pleasure to have you. Have a good one.